Hello everybody. Say, remember how in my second review I said I would be reviewing a lot of Sonic the Hedgehog comics? Well, today I'm making good on that promise, as this review is of the Archie Sonic comic arc, Champions. I'm not going to analyze any of the covers. Sure, they're all nice looking, but none of them are interesting enough to spend minutes talking about. Except for 269's cover, as its design is rather poor. For crying out loud, it's just a generic close-up of Sonic's face! I mean, I guess somebody could get interested in picking this comic up off the shelf after seeing this cover, but I seriously doubt anybody would. Anyway, the first issue starts off in a flashback to the classic era, specifically Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for the Sega Master System. You might remember this game as the one where Eggman kidnaps a small boy, and somehow doesn't wind up on a watch list. Here, Sonic is currently fighting against that game's first boss, the Antlion Mecha, renamed to the Egg Antlion in this comic, and this robot monkey named Coconuts. For those of you who don't know, Coconuts is a badnik who originated from the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon. He also showed up in the Archie Sonic pre-reboot continuity, long story there, not important in this review, and in both of those, he was part of the super special Sonic Search and Smash Squad. A group of badniks whose main goal was to defeat Sonic so that they could impress Eggman. But they constantly failed because every member was a comic relief character. Speaking of, after Sonic beats Coconuts, he heads off to find the other two mainstays of the S6 team, Scratch and Grounder. I knew Coconuts would blow it! Hey Scratch, you ever think the reason your team can't capture Sonic is because you're all working against each other when you should be working together? I'm just saying, take a couple of team building exercises, and you should at least be able to slow Sonic down. Actually, Scratch's plan is surprisingly sound, as the basic idea is for him and Grounder to pretend to hold this mint green hedgehog captive, and after Sonic beats them up, she'll convince him to take her along under the guise of being defenseless if other Eggman robots attack her. All the while, she'll actually be signaling badniks to attack Sonic. In summary, Sonic will be slowed down by carrying somebody who will constantly be snitching on him, and he'll be putting himself at risk in order to keep said snitch safe. This is an unusually clever plan for the S6 team to have come up with. Like, Pterodax levels of clever. Even more surprising, this plan actually works, as Sonic instant KOs both Scratch and Grounder, and then agrees to take the other hedgehog, named Breezy, with him. And if that name seems familiar to you, that's because she was also a character from the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. However, unlike the S6 team, Breezy never showed up in the pre-reboot timeline. This is a thing that happened a bit after the reboot, obscure characters from other parts of the franchise being introduced into the comics. Heck, we'll even be seeing a few more of those as this story goes on. Anyway, younger Sonic agrees to take Breezy with him, and the flashback ends revealing that Sonic was telling this story to his friends the Freedom Fighters. Yeah, I'm not going to be explaining who these guys are, as not only are they not particularly relevant to this story, but I also have plans to cover a story that directly focuses on them at a later date. So you'll all have to wait a bit for me to talk about them. And make no mistake, I will have a lot to say about them. Like, a lot. But why is Sonic telling them about the time he was tricked by those stupid badniks? Well, turns out that Breezy is now the owner of the world's largest entertainment network, and she just announced a fighting tournament with a Chaos Emerald as a prize, to which the Freedom Fighters enlisted for, but they were only able to get Sonic, Tails, and Amy spots on the roster. And for those of you who haven't figured it out yet, this story is basically an adaptation of the Sonic the Fighters arcade game. Now you might be wondering why the Freedom Fighters are even interested in acquiring that Chaos Emerald. You know, apart from keeping it out of the hands of the usual suspects. Well, during this period in the comics, Eggman fucked everything up so badly that the planet split apart, and now there are dark energy monsters that come out at night, and Sonic and friends have to use the Chaos Emeralds to fix all this. Which means that this comic is doing a short adaptation of Sonic the Fighters, while it's also doing a long adaptation of Sonic Unleashed, and this story started with a flashback to an adaptation of Master System Sonic 2. Adaptception! But now another question arises. If the Freedom Fighters need the Chaos Emerald to save the world, why don't they just steal it? A sentiment shared by one member of the FF, Rotor Walrus, who thinks that it really wouldn't matter since Breezy is connected to a lot of shady stuff anyway. There are, however, two easy rebuttals to this. The first being that the Freedom Fighters are the paragon heroes of this world, so they can't just go around stealing stuff, especially from people who at least seem to be legitimate business operators. Well, the second rebuttal can basically be summarized as Breezy can just drown the Freedom Fighters in bad publicity if they steal the Chaos Emerald from her. Put simply, it'll be very hard to save the world if the world is convinced that you're the bad guy. However, Tails brings up a bit of a concerning fact. Neither of those points apply to Robotnik, so there isn't anything stopping him from stealing the emerald. Except there are actually a lot of things keeping Robotnik from stealing it, as explained in a short sequence that essentially serves as Breezy's character introduction. The gist of why Eggman hasn't already taken the emerald is that his forces are too busy dealing with the planet being broken into literal chunks. So he can't send a large force to attack Breezy, and any small force he might be able to round up would just get curb-stomped by her defenses, the majority of which are made up of refurbished badniks sold to her by Robotnik himself. Well, that and her casino's staff members are also refurbished badniks, as are some of her decorations, and she even has Coconuts working as her personal assistant. Heck! Even the locale Breezy's operating out of is an old Eggman base from the games. Specifically Casino Park from Sonic Heroes. And he can't stop doing that either, as he'd be severing one of his most lucrative trade deals. But hey, if money is an item here, then maybe he can just buy it off her.
You serious?
Yeah, it turns out that, as far as Breezy is concerned, even the largest amount of money she'd make by just selling the Chaos Emerald would be minuscule when compared to the amount she'd make by using it for a publicity stunt. And seeing as Eggman has nothing to bargain or threaten with, she has Coconuts hang up on the good doctor, while she checks a problem that Scratch and Grounder are having. Yes, all of the S6 squad work for Breezy now. And look, I know I just spent the last minute talking about what basically boils down to the writer justifying why the plot is going away that, under standard circumstances, it wouldn't. But the fact that it's done so well is precisely why I have to talk about it. For instance, well, the earlier segment with the Freedom Fighters does set up the Sonic the Fighters adaptation, and establishes that Breezy has a Chaos Emerald, and why Sonic and Co. can't just steal it. That's all it does. All of the traits displayed by Sonic, Tails, and Amy are minor character traits which any casual viewer would know they have, and the same goes for the Freedom Fighters, but as said before, they aren't the focus of this story, so any traits demonstrated aren't noteworthy here. Sure, this bit also gives some exposition on who Breezy is, but it's all tell and no show. In comparison, the segment with Eggman and Breezy establishes everything the first segment does, and then some. In essence, well, the main plot-relevant point of this bit is to show why Robotnik can't just steal the emerald. Its main story-relevant point is to set up exactly what the power dynamic between Eggman and Breezy is. As most any Sonic fan knows, Robotnik is the kind of guy who, while he can be meticulous and deceptive, would rather smash anything that stood in his way with brute force, hence why he was primarily threatening Breezy with military might rather than with severing economic ties or immediately offering to buy her out. And make no mistake, Eggman is a doer. If he had the ability to attack her, he would. And Breezy knows this as well, as, although it's never stated outright, the implication is that if Eggman could simply take the emerald from her, she would just hand it over to him to avoid any disruptions to her business empire. However, since Eggman can't muster a strong enough force to attack her, not only does Robotnik not have anything to threaten or bargain with, but Breezy is also taking advantage of the situation to gain as much power for herself as possible. That power being that of the almighty dollar. As well, she is profiting greatly from her fighting tournament, she also holds power over Eggman via the trade deal they have going on, since he can't stop selling her his outdated badniks without losing out on a considerable chunk of cash. In short, Breezy is an ambitious character who, well, quite weak in a straight-up fight, can absolutely dominate anybody if they can get them to play by their rules. Think something along the lines of Darby the Gambler from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, or Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. Would most likely lose in a traditional fight, but if they have anything of value to hold over their opponent's head, and anything to keep said opponent from decking them in the face, they can play their enemies, and even their allies, like a damn fiddle. But now that I've finished with that, wasn't there a tournament arc in this comic somewhere? Yeah, that won't have started until the next issue. Still, Sonic and company did just arrive at Casino Park, and Breezy is even there to welcome them and engage in witty repartee with Sonic. An instance where the ball is practically anchored to Breezy's side of the court. That is until Sonic requests all of his matches be scheduled during the day. When Breezy refuses, Sonic drops right out of the competition, to which she reacts by immediately folding and agrees to Sonic's singular term, which she only does because, if Sonic drops out, she loses her biggest audience draw her fighting tournament has. And after staring some daggers at the blue blur, Breezy huffs off to take care of other things. And with her gone, 'tis high time this comic introduced the other competitors in this championship. The first of which is one of those obscure characters I mentioned before, that of course being Honey the Cat. She was a character that was supposed to show up in Sonic the Fighters, but was cut shortly before the game released.
That's bad.
But was finally made playable when the PSN and Xbox Live ports were published.
That's good.
Her design and name were taken from another Sega character from the Fighting Vipers series, and as of this story, they now have the same backstory of being a fashion designer. Speaking of, the reason she joined the championship is to promote her clothing company, and seeing as she'd have no use for the Chaos Emerald, she agrees to give it to the Freedom Fighters if she wins, 'cause you know, they kinda need it to save the world. However, if she does win the emerald for them, the Freedom Fighters will have to help Honey promote her next line of clothing. Something which Amy will probably do regardless, as she is such a fan of Honey's work that her primary outfit is, and I quote, part of Honey's old Dreamcaster's clothing line. I see what you did there, Flynn, you cheeky devil you. Tails, however, is less enthusiastic about Honey's proposition, a problem that isn't helped by her making this face. That said, Sonic is just glad Honey is willing to work with them. Oh boy, it's nice to have someone else on our side at least, since we don't know who else we're facing yet. Ironically, if Sonic had just glanced a little to his left, he would have noticed these jokers skulking around over here. These guys are Team Hooligan, a group comprised of Knack the Weasel, aka Fang the Sniper, Bark the Polar Bear, and Bean the Dynamite Duck. They were also playable characters from Sonic the Fighters, who unfortunately have also languished in obscurity. However, they are nowhere near as obscure as so many of the other characters I've gone into detail on in this review, due in no small part to them showing up regularly in the pre-reboot continuity. Albeit not as a team. Much rather, Knack made regular appearances as an assassin for hire, mostly working solo. Bean and Bark, on the other hand, did start out working together as a pair of thugs. Kinda like Rough and Tumble from the IDW comics, but with a different type of comedy dynamic. Team Hooligan only formed for one story in the old continuity, Then they didn't show up again until after the reboot, because other things that didn't concern them were going on. As for why they're taking part in the championship, well, you know how I said that Eggman is a doer earlier in the review? Well, after Breezy hung up on him, Robotnik called on the Hooligans to do some heavy lifting for him. Sure, he might not be able to just invade Casino Park, but there's nothing stopping him from hiring some mercenaries to fight in the championship for him. And if that doesn't work, the Hooligans can just disable the casino's defenses, allowing Metal Sonic to swoop in and steal the emerald. Oh yeah, after hiring the Hooligans, Eggman also dialed up Metal Sonic and called him away from interrogating an old man, who I'm sure won't be important in any ongoing game adaptations at all. Anyway, after spotting Sonic and friends, and almost making a scene, the Hooligans decide that they should keep a low profile so they can maybe catch one of their adversaries by surprise. Of course, Espio the Chameleon saw them almost make said scene, and seeing as he's one of Sonic's allies, he'll no doubt be tattling to the other heroes about the Hooligans. And hey, Espio's a member of the Chaotix, or, as I like to call them, those guys who only show up in good Sonic comics. So Espio being here must mean the rest of the Chaotix are nearby. Wrong! Yeah, turns out that Vector and Charmy weren't able to get on the championship roster, and that's definitely the reason why they don't have a major role in this story. It certainly isn't because they didn't show up in Sonic the Fighters, or because the cast is starting to get crowded. But yeah, the other members of the Chaotix are about as important as the Freedom Fighters are to this story. So I should really just stop wasting everybody's time and move on to talking about the last important character to be introduced in the first issue. That being Knuckles the Echidna, of course. He isn't here to compete in the championship, though. Much rather, he's here looking for shards of the Master Emerald, which was broken in a previous story. But that's a story for another time. Also, Chip, the cosmic companion character from Sonic Unleashed, is traveling with Knuckles here. But that's also a story for another time. Moving on to the second issue, and it opens on another flashback to the Master System Sonic 2 adaptation, where Sonic and Breezy are ambushed by a prototype version of Silver Sonic. Yes, that Silver Sonic. Speaking of, looking at this image, some of you might be thinking that this prototype is just as big, if not bigger than the finished Silver Sonic model. And you would be the people who haven't played Sonic 2 for the Sega Master System, or even looked it up online, cause the prototype Silver Sonic is exactly the same size as classic Sonic. And the only reason it looks as big as it does here isn't because it's larger than Sonic, but because the artist messed up a perspective shot. That's a real shame, as the art throughout the rest of the story is very good, but I'll talk more about that later. Anyway, it is at this moment that Breezy chooses to get the inevitable out of the way, and suddenly reveals she'd betrayed Sonic long before they'd even met. Sonic is of course ticked off by this, not because he ever really trusted her that much, but because, at this time, he's trying to rescue Tails from Eggman. So somebody willingly being complicit in endangering a child's life is something he just can't comprehend. Breezy, however, is more than willing to aid Robotnik, so long as she no longer has to worry about being impoverished, regardless of those who suffer as a result, and she sicks Proto-Silver Sonic on our hero. And the flashback ends there, with Breezy, in the present, reminiscing that even then Sonic went on to beat Eggman, rescue Tails, and become the hero he is today. Which might seem like an acknowledgement of Sonic's strong moral constitution, until Breezy ends that thought by proclaiming that she can still manipulate him to gain power for herself. It's much less a compliment and much more a glove slap. Speaking of Sonic, he just won a match against Segata Sanshiro, yes, that really is him, after which he takes a brief moment to soak in the adoration of the audience. This is cut short when Amy informs him that the sun's about to set, and well, remember how Sonic basically strong-armed Breezy into only having him fight during the daytime? That's because, in addition to every other part of Sonic Unleashed that's being adapted here, Sonic is transforming into his werehog form at night. However, unlike the game, Sonic doesn't start turning into a werehog right from the get-go, as his first transformation only happened in the story arc that immediately preceded this one, which took place way after the planet broke apart in this continuity. So Sonic really doesn't want people finding out about his current condition, especially since said first transformation only happened because an obsessive electrical chinchilla really pissed him off. Fortunately, he can still watch his friends fight in the tournament from his hotel room. The first of which being Amy's absolute curb stomp of this boar character, whose design is a reference to another Fighting Vipers character, Jane. But yeah, no contest as to who wins this fight, so let's move on to the next one, which is a much more balanced fight between Honey and Tails. Or rather, that's how Tails sees it at least. On the other hand, Honey has absolutely no qualms about fighting as brutally as she reasonably can, or just straight up making the kid fall for the old look and obvious distraction trick. And geez, Tails just has the worst luck with fighting tournaments, doesn't he?
First Rouge embarrasses him in Sonic X, now this. Man, if this isn't the start of a demoralizing trend, I don't know what is.
Of course, Tails is understandably upset with Honey for using almost all the underhanded tactics, though she assures Tails that teleporting behind him was nothing personal. That, and she offers to help him accessorize. And I'm pretty sure the only reason he isn't passing on her offer is because he knows this face is anything but the face of mercy.
It's too cute! It's disgusting!
Moving on from that, we got our next fight, a bout between Espio and Bean, where Bean is acting very strange, which says a lot when I'm saying that about a character like Bean.
For those of you who don't know, Bean is straight up the Sonic comic equivalent of Deadpool, complete with all the wackiness and fourth wall breaking that entails. So trust me, it means a lot when I say he's acting strange.
For instance, Bean is usually very energetic and lively, bordering on hyperactive more than half of the time, yet here he's drowsy and lethargic, bordering on being only half awake. Not only that, but he's also having a hard time remembering who Espio is, in spite of the Hooligans and Chaotix having fought each other in a fairly recent story, where Bean used some of his bombs to perform a ninja vanish, and Espio took offense to the duck not understanding the subtle art of how ninjas actually vanish. Kinda like how he's taking offense to Bean not taking him seriously right now. Yeah, if you haven't figured it out by now, Bean isn't actually feeling drowsy, he's just channeling his inner Joseph Joestar to rile up Espio, and the fight ends with Bean tripping him out of the ring. And the winner by ring out, Bean! You baited me. You were playing me from the start.
Who's the tough guy now? Huh, tough guy?
Of course, all of you are probably wondering the same thing. Just what the heck is Knuckles doing during all of this?
Oh, not much. Just retrieving one of the Master Emerald shards. And I do mean only one, as Knuckles thought he was sensing multiple shards at this location, but it turns out he was just getting a lot of interference from the Chaos Emerald that serves as the championship prize. Speaking of, Scratch pops up to inform Knuckles that if he doesn't hurry over to the arena, he'll be late for his first match.
Which is odd, as Knuckles is only here because he's looking for the shards of the Master Emerald, and he never even registered in the tournament, but hey, why look a gift robot chicken in the mouth?
Especially when, if he wins the championship, Chip will be one step closer to having all the Chaos Emeralds so he can save the world. Admittedly, that's easier said than done, especially when his first opponent is Bark the Polar Bear, a guy who doesn't waste any time bantering, he just punches things. Fortunately, Knuckles is quite good at punching people while not talking, so this fight is easily the most even one so far. That and also the most brutal one as well, as it just breaks down to two hunks of muscle trying to outdo each other in the field of punching the other guy more, which the viewers in the Intercuts
chats are absolutely loving.
Oh right, I forgot to mention that every fight in this issue, from Tails v Honey onward, has had additional panels which show the reactions of characters from elsewhere in the world.
Tails v Honey gave the Freedom Fighters a reaction scene. By the way, Cream the Rabbit and Big the Cat are also part of the FF. And Cream freaks out because of Honey's underhanded fighting. SBO v Bean had Charmy and Vector giving some uninterestingly average reactions to that fight. And Knuckles v Bark had 3 distinct intercuts to different parts of the world. The first 2 are of Egg Army bases, where the respective commanding officers have vastly different ideas for how their soldiers can spend their free time. While the final one is of GUN HQ, where Team Dark are enjoying Knuckles' now assured beatdown of Bark. All except for Shadow, as he is currently bitter at Knuckles for something that's too complicated to explain right now. But yeah, Knuckles stands battered and bruised, but nonetheless triumphant over Bark's unconscious body. Tails and Espio are indignant about losing their fights. Amy is shocked to learn that she'll be fighting Knuckles next in her next match. Honey is excited to be fighting Sonic in her next match. And the second issue comes to an end with Robotnik making preparations for possible sabotage.
Now, seeing as I'm reviewing all 4 issues of this story as a singular item, and I only went over 2 in this video, I won't be giving my ratings this time round, nor will I be doing a full analysis.
That said, I will say that the story so far has been great. The artwork, apart from the odd flub, has been amazing, the fights have been fun to watch, and the writing, especially for the characters, has been absolutely on point.
Hopefully, the next 2 issues will keep up this winning streak when I review them next week. Until then, have a very good day!
You know, this bit where Coconuts hangs up on Eggman has got to be the most self-satisfied he's ever been, not only in his entire life, but in the entirety of the franchise.